This is part 2 of a video set on functions, and in this video we're going to talk about how to evaluate or solve equations involving functions when all we're given is the table or graph. So number 2 here starts with a table, and in this table I've relabeled the y column f of x. That's the first thing that you need to understand, is that when you see the notation f of x, that's just another placeholder for y. And so I'm going to write that two ways up here. One is I'm going to rewrite it y equals f of x. A lot of people have seen that before. But actually, when you're solving equations or evaluating functions, sometimes it's better to write the f of x first and say that that's equal to y. And I'll show you why that is in a minute here. So we're asked to use the table to find f of 4. And so the first thing you want to understand is when you see that notation f of 4, if you're given a number that's inside the parentheses here, that is inside the parentheses here, so that's an x value. And when you're asked to find f of 4, what you're asked to find is the y value when x is 4. Let me write that down. Find y when x is 4. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here to my table and I'm going to find an x value of 4, and then I'm going to determine that the y value there is 2. So we'll say f of 4 equals 2. Notice this is the x, this is the y. And in the second problem here, find f of 1, again because this 1 is inside the parentheses, that's an x value. So what I'm asked to find is find y when x equals 1. So I'm going to come down here to x equals 1 and read off the y value, which is negative 3. Now the next two problems say solve. And anytime you're asked to solve something, you're typically looking for x values. Notice that the x value is not known here, but what you're given over here is the output number. So if I write above here f of x equals y, you can see that this 1 right here is corresponding to the y value. So when it says solve f of x equals 1, they're asking you to then find x when y equals 1. So you're given a different coordinate. So if I want to find x when y equals 1, I notice that y equals 1 right here, and the x value that goes with it is negative 1. So I would write x equals negative 1 for the solution to that one. And for this last one, solve f of x equals negative 1, again, this is the same as f of x equals y. This negative 1 that they're giving me is a y value, so this is asking me to find x when y equals negative 1. So if I come over here to my table, here's y equals negative 1. The x value that goes with that is 0. So you need to keep track of whether you're being given an x value or a y value, and whatever you're given, you're typically asked to find the other value. So let's take a look at a graph now that uses that same notation. So here's a graph, and we are asked to find different values, and this graph is called g. So I'll just put g of x on here. And again, the g, there's nothing you really do with it. They're just telling you that's the name that we're given to the graph. Names of functions are typically f, g, h, j, sort of the close to the beginning of the alphabet. So in this first one, I'm asked to find g of 0 from the graph. So again, up here I'm going to write g of x equals y, just so I keep track of what I'm given. And in this problem now I'm given that x is 0. So what I'm asked to find is the y value when x equals 0. So I need to look at all of these points on my graph. There's lots of coordinates here. And I'm looking for the one with an x coordinate of 0. Well, the one that has an x coordinate of 0 is this one right here. This is 0, -4. So the y value when x is 0 is -4. That means we write g of 0 equals -4. Again, this is x, this is y. Second question here says solve g of x equals 0. So again, I'm going to write under it g of x equals y to keep track of what number I'm given. And in this case, I'm given that y is 0. So this one's the reverse. This is asking me to find x when y equals 0. So I need to go along my graph, find any points that have a y coordinate of 0. Well, in this case, I think I've got a couple of them. I've got this point right here, 4, 0, and this point right here, -4, 0. So there's actually two values of x that have a y value of 0. So we would just write x equals -4 or x equals 4. Third problem here, find g of 1. I'm going to write it one more time, g of x equals y. Here I'm given that x is 1. So this is saying find y when x is 1. So if I go along and I look at all of the points on my graph and I find the one with an x coordinate of 1, that's right here. So the y value is -3, so we would write g of 1, that's a positive 1, equals -3. And the last, we got two more. Solve g of x equals 1. Again, write it one more time, g of x equals y. This is telling me that a y value is 1. So I want to find x when y equals 1. Here's a y value of 1 up here. So I'm going to go over to my graph right here and over here to the left. There's two x values that make that happen. I think this is the point 5, 1, and this is the point -5, 1. So there are two solutions, 5 or -5. And the last one, g of x equals 2, again, this is a y value. So this is saying find x when y equals 2. Again, if I come up here to y equals 2 and I read over on my graph, I've got 2 points where y is 2. One of them happens at x equals 6, and one of them happens at x equals -6. So that's how you either evaluate or solve functions from graphs and tables.